I was sent to betray the three most dangerous alphas in the city, steal their secrets, destroy their empire, then disappear. But I made one fatal mistake. I fell in love with one of them. When my betrayal was exposed, I thought they would cast me out. I was wrong. The files were open. Every document Jihoon had spent 31 days bleeding for sat right there on the screen, clean, complete, devastating. The acquisition records. The private contracts. The offshore routing numbers that 3 generations of Kong power had never allowed outside this building. His handler would weep looking at this. The organization had been waiting months for exactly what glowed on that screen in cold blue light. Jihoon's hands had not moved in 11 minutes. The server room hummed around him, a low, mechanical breathing that filled the silence where his own thoughts should have been. The air was cold enough to sting. His fingers rested on the keyboard like they belonged to someone else. Someone who still knew what they were doing here. Someone who still believed the mission made sense. He had come in with a stolen name, a borrowed life, and 30 days to complete a job that was supposed to be simple. Get inside the Kong group. Build access. Extract the files. Disappear. The organization had laid it out like arithmetic. Clean numbers, clean steps, clean exit. They had told him the Kangs were exactly the kind of men the world needed exposed. They had told him this was justice. They had not told him about the umbrella. They had not told him about 4 words on a terminal screen that would land in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. They had not told him that the man at the center of everything, cold, composed, carved from something harder than ambition, would look at him one afternoon across a corridor and make Jihoon feel, for the first time in 24 years, like someone worth looking at. The cursor blinked. The files waited. Jihoon stared at the screen and felt grief move through him like weather, quiet, total, and completely without mercy. He did not transmit the files. He did not close them either. He simply sat in the dark in the hum and the blue light, frozen between the life he had been handed and the one he had somehow, stupidly, dangerously begun to want. And then, a sound. Not the servers. Not the ventilation. Footsteps. Stopping just outside the door. Jihoon's eyes moved to the doorway. The light from the corridor cut a long rectangle across the floor. And inside that light, perfectly still, stood a silhouette that Jihoon's body recognized before his mind caught up. Tall. Dark-suited. Hands loose at his sides. Kong Ryan. He was standing in the doorway. And Jihoon had no idea, none, how long he had been there. If you felt that tension, you are exactly where this story needs you. Stay close, because what happens next will change everything. Drop a comment below and tell us, did Jihoon make the right call? We will be reading every single one. 3 months before that server room, Jihoon owned nothing worth stealing. A single room in Mapo, 4th floor walk-up, window that faced a concrete wall. A part-time job filing documents at a logistics firm that paid just enough to keep the lights on and not enough to sleep without worry. He had aged out of the welfare system at 19 and spent the years since learning how to need less food, less warmth, less hope. He was good at it. Surviving on the edges of things was the one skill no one had ever needed to teach him. When the organization found him, he had been awake for 20 hours straight, studying for a legal certification he could not afford to fail. The man who sat across from him in a Maple coffee shop at 2 in the morning did not waste time on charm. He laid out the offer with the flat efficiency of someone reading a parts list. There was a firm. There were men. There were files. There was compensation, enough to relocate his younger cousin out of the welfare facility in Incheon and into something stable, something safe. All Jihoon had to do was get inside. The briefing took 40 minutes. The Kong triplets were described the way people described weather before a flood, inevitable, impersonal, and without conscience. Jihoon was handed a fabricated resume, a new name, and a burner device. He was told the interview was already arranged. He was told to be precise, to be quiet, and above all, to remember who these men really were underneath the tailored suits and glass towers. He said yes before the coffee cooled. The Udo Tower gleamed like a blade against the gray winter sky the morning he walked in. He answered every question without flinching. His hands were steady. His voice was measured. He was hired as a junior analyst in legal affairs within the week and told to report Monday. He sat in the back of the conference room that first Monday while senior staff cycled through introductions. He was watching the door when Kong Ryan walked in, and the entire room adjusted. Not loudly. People did not gasp or scramble. They simply shifted, the way a compass needle shifts when something magnetic enters range. Ryan moved to the head of the table without looking at anyone. He sat down. He opened a folder. He did not speak. He did not need to. Jihoon had prepared for arrogance. He had prepared for cruelty, the performance of it, the casual exercise of it. He had not prepared for this. For a man who carried power so quietly it felt less like a display and more like a fact of nature. For eyes that, when they finally moved across the room in a slow, brief scan, seemed to register everything and file it with the same cold efficiency as the documents on the table. Those eyes passed over Jihoon without pausing. That evening, Jihoon filed his first progress report on the burner device. Arrival confirmed. Access established. Targets identified. He typed the words cleanly and sent them without hesitation. But there was one thing he did not include in the report. One small, inconvenient, embarrassing fact that he pushed down and covered over like a crack in pavement. The way his pulse had jumped, just once, when Kong Ryan's eyes had moved across the room. He told himself it was alertness. Professional focus. The natural response of someone doing a high-stakes job. He was already lying. The misfile happened on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks in, when the office had emptied down to the cleaning crew and one stubborn junior analyst who could not let a routing error sit until morning. Jihoon had noticed it by accident. A critical contract folder flagged for the acquisitions team had been redirected to external compliance, 2 departments and 1 security clearance away from where it needed to be. By morning, 3 senior managers would arrive to missing documentation, and the kind of panic that ripples upward fast in a building like this one. He found the error. He corrected the routing. He placed the folder where it needed to be, returned to his desk, and finished his coffee. No one saw him. Or so he believed. The next morning, a message arrived on his internal work terminal from an address he did not recognize. No subject line. No greeting. 4 words. Good instincts. Don't waste them. Jihoon read it once. Then twice. Then a third time, which he was aware was one time too many for something he was supposed to treat as unremarkable. He closed the message. He opened his case files. He did not think about it. He thought about it all day. That same afternoon, the burner device buzzed in his jacket pocket during a team briefing. He stepped out to take the call. The voice on the other end did not ask how he was doing. You are behind schedule. We need movement on the acquisition files. You have access to the legal department, use it. I'm building trust, Jihoon said. That takes time. You have a cousin in Incheon, the voice said. He is doing well. We would like to keep it that way. The line went dead. Jihoon stood in the stairwell for 30 seconds with his eyes closed. Then he straightened his jacket, went back inside, and sat down like nothing had happened. He was good at that, putting his face back together when the inside of him had gone to pieces. 24 years of practice made it almost automatic. The next morning, he arrived at his desk to find a black umbrella leaning against his monitor. No note. No explanation. Just the umbrella, clean, expensive, the kind that did not collapse in sole wind, sitting there as though it had always been there. Jihoon looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked around the office. No one met his eyes. No one acknowledged it. He sat down. He pulled up his files. He worked the entire day without touching it. But on the subway home that evening, it sat across his knees, and he held it with both hands the way a person holds something they are not sure they are allowed to keep. The train rocked. The city lights blurred past the dark windows. And something moved in Jihoon's chest that had no clean name, not gratitude, not confusion, not the careful nothing he had trained himself to feel on assignment. It was warmer than any of those things. And much more dangerous. Kong Ryan had noticed him. Not as an analyst. Not as a body in a seat. As a person worth noticing. That was the moment Jihoon should have walked away from all of it. The job, the building, the man with the still eyes and the forward message that had already taken up too much space in his head. He did not walk away. And every single thing that came after, every beautiful, devastating, life-altering thing, began right there, on a late-night subway with a borrowed umbrella and a feeling he refused to name. By the 5th week, Jihoon had stopped seeing targets. That was the problem. That was the thing the organization had never accounted for, and the thing Jihoon himself had not seen coming. That prolonged proximity to real human beings had a way of dissolving the clean lines of a briefing document. The Kong triplets on paper were leverage points and liability risks. The Kong triplets in person were something else entirely, and the distance between those two versions was widening every day. He saw it first with Jihoon. The eldest Kong kept a framed photograph on the corner of his desk, a small wooden frame, slightly worn at the edges, holding a black and white image of an elderly woman with kind eyes and a serious mouth. Jihoon had walked past that desk a dozen times before he noticed that Jihoon never placed paperwork on that corner. Never stacked files near it. Never let anything crowd it. One afternoon, a junior associate reached past it carelessly while delivering documents, and Jihoon's hand moved, just slightly, just barely, repositioning the frame with 2 fingers after the associate left. He did it without looking. Without thinking. The way a person protects something so precious, the reflex lives in the body long after the grief moves out of the mind. Jihoon had filed that away without knowing what to do with it. Then there was Tail. The youngest triplet had a reputation in the building that made newer staff lower their voices when his name came up. Severe was the word most often used. Precise. Unforgiving of error. Jihoon had believed it until the Friday he arrived early and found the executive elevator occupied, Tail inside, in the same expensive suit he wore to board meetings, holding 2 cups of convenience store sundubujigi and talking to the overnight security guard about the guard's daughter's school entrance exam results. Actually talking. Leaning against the elevator wall with his arms crossed and his eyes sharp and warm in a way that never appeared in meetings. The guard was laughing. Tail was not, but his silence had a different quality in that moment. Something gentler lived in it. The elevator doors had closed before either of them noticed Jihoon standing there. And then, Ryan? It was a corridor on the 14th floor, late on a Tuesday, and Jihoon was carrying a folder of documents toward the filing room when Ryan came around the corner from the opposite direction. They both slowed. There was no particular reason for either of them to stop. The hallway was wide enough. The moment should have lasted 2 seconds, a nod, a passage, nothing. But Ryan stopped walking. And Jihoon stopped walking. And for a span of time that Jihoon could not have measured, they simply looked at each other, and something passed between them in that silence that had no name in any language Jihoon had studied. Not a question. Not a threat. Something older than either of those things. Recognition without history. The feeling of turning a corner and finding a door you did not know you had been looking for. Ryan broke it first. He gave a single, small nod and continued walking. Jihoon stood in the corridor for 3 full seconds before he remembered how to move. That night, he opened the burner device to file his 10th progress report. His hands were not steady. He typed the required fields, access status, documentation progress, timeline update, and sent it before he could think too long about what he was omitting. The organization wanted evidence of monsters. What Jihoon had found were 3 men who carried their grief privately, who protected people out of reflex, who looked at a junior analyst in a hallway like he was something real. That made everything, every single part of what he had come here to do, so much worse. The office emptied at 8:15 on a Thursday night, and Jihoon was still at his desk because he had nowhere more important to be, and work was the one place where he knew exactly who he was supposed to be. He did not hear Ryan until the man was 3 feet away. "You are reading Chai Manchik." Not a question. Ryan was looking at the slim paperback Jihoon had left face down on the corner of his desk, a worn copy of Peace Under Heaven, the kind that had been read enough times the spine no longer held a straight line. Jihoon looked up. Ryan was standing with his jacket still on, no folder in hand, which meant he had not come to the 14th floor for documents. "I found it in a second-hand stall in Hongdae," Jihoon said. 3 years ago. Most people his age find it assigned reading." Ryan pulled the chair from the empty desk beside Jihoon's and sat down without asking. "They do not find it in Hongdae at 2001 and carry it until the spine breaks. Most people his age did not grow up the way I did," Jihoon said, and then caught himself, because that was too honest, too close, the kind of answer that came from the real version of him rather than the constructed one. Ryan did not look away. "What does that mean?" Jihoon held the eye contact. Decided. "It means books were easier to afford than people." A beat of silence. Then Ryan said, "He was writing about a Korea that was already dying while he wrote it. Most readers miss that. They see the satire. They do not see the grief underneath it. The grief is the point," Jihoon said. "The satire is just how he survived writing it." Something moved across Ryan's face, not a smile, not quite, but the muscles around his eyes shifted in a way that changed the entire quality of his stillness. He reached across the desk and picked up the book. Turned it over. Set it back down. His hand came within 4 centimeters of Jihoon's before pulling away. "There is a private collection," Ryan said. "Colonial-era first editions. In the building's archive, 3rd basement level. I have never shown it to anyone who works here." He paused. "I have thought about showing it to you." The air in the office changed. Jihoon felt it in his throat first, a tightening, a held breath that his body produced without asking his permission. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside the windows, Seoul blazed and sprawled, indifferent and enormous, and in the whole enormous city the only thing Jihoon could fully register was the 6 inches between his hand and Ryan's and the fact that neither of them had moved. They spent another 40 minutes talking, Korean art history, the identity politics of the Joseon Restoration period, a minor argument about whether a specific Yi dynasty landscape currently housed in a Samcheongdong gallery had been misattributed. Jihoon held his own. More than held it, pushed back, corrected, offered a reference that made Ryan pause mid-sentence and look at him with an expression that Jihoon had never seen on that face before. Open. Unguarded. Briefly, completely undefended. "Most people in this building," Ryan said quietly, "perform intelligence. You actually have it." Jihoon said nothing. His chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with pain. Ryan stood. He gathered nothing, he had brought nothing, and walked toward the elevator. At the doorway he stopped with his back still turned, and Jihoon watched the line of his shoulders in the dark hallway, and the silence lasted long enough that it became its own kind of language. Then Ryan walked out. Jihoon sat alone in the empty office with the city burning outside the glass and his heart hammering so hard he felt it in his palms, and he knew, with the clear, calm, terrible certainty of someone who has just stepped off a ledge, that he was in serious trouble. Ryan had stepped back. He had walked away. But his eyes, in that last unguarded moment, had said something his mouth absolutely refused to. And Jihoon had heard every word. The ultimatum arrived at 6 in the morning, 3 lines on the burner device, no greeting, no signature. 48 hours. The acquisition files? Or the boy in Incheon stops being your concern. Jihoon read it standing in his maple apartment in yesterday's clothes, the city outside his window still gray and half asleep. He read it twice. Then he set the device face down on the counter and stood very still, the way a person stands when the walls of the situation they built around themselves finally close in to touching distance. He went to work. He sat through a morning briefing with his hands flat on the table and his face arranged into the careful neutral expression he had perfected over years of having nothing to show and nowhere safe to show it. He answered 2 emails. He reviewed a contract amendment. He did all of it with the mechanical precision of someone operating from a place so far inside themselves that the outside world was just motion and noise. At 2 in the afternoon he walked into the server room, sat down, and opened the acquisition files. They were all still there. Every document. Every routing number. Every name. The mission, complete and waiting, exactly as it had been the night Ryan appeared in the doorway. Jihoon stared at the screen. 11 minutes passed. He closed the files. He did not transmit a single byte. He stood up, and his legs carried him out of the server room and down the hallway before he had consciously decided to move, and when he turned the corner Kong Ryan was standing there, not waiting, not watching, just present, holding 2 paper cups of coffee the way a man holds something ordinary, and looking at Jihoon with an expression that cut straight through every layer of careful nothing Jihoon had constructed around himself all day. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Ryan said. He held out one of the cups. Jihoon took it. His hand was not steady. He looked down at the cup because looking at Ryan's face right now was more than he could afford, and something cracked open in his chest, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, total finality of ice giving way in early spring. "I think," Jihoon said very quietly, to the paper cup in his hands, "I have made a terrible mistake." Silence. Then Ryan's voice, low and without any sharpness in it at all. "Tell me." Jihoon looked up. Ryan was watching him with those still, dark eyes, and there was nothing cold in them right now, nothing composed or distant or professionally neutral. There was only attention. Complete, unguarded, costly attention. The kind that said, "I am here. I am not leaving. Whatever this is, say it, *." Jihoon opened his mouth. And closed it. Because standing there in the corridor with the weight of 48 hours pressing against his ribs, and Kong Ryan looking at him like he was worth the truth, all Jihoon could feel was the mass of every lie he had ever told this man stacking up behind his teeth like stones behind a dam. He was not ready to say it yet. But he was no longer able to carry it alone. And that precise, terrifying moment of, "I cannot do this by myself anymore," was the beginning of the end of everything Jihoon had built to protect himself. 2 words. "Tell me." And the dam already had cracks running all the way through it. The choice Jihoon makes next will cost him everything, or give him the one thing he has never had. Stay with us. Subscribe if you have not already, and drop a comment telling us, would you have the courage to confess in that moment? Jihoon talked for 22 minutes without stopping. He did not soften it. He did not arrange it into something more forgivable, or frame it with context designed to make himself look less like what he was. He said the organization's name. He described the briefing, the fabricated resume, the burner device, the encrypted reports filed every 10 days. He told Ryan about the cousin in Incheon, and exactly how that leverage had been used. He laid out the timeline, every week, every access point, every document he had touched and catalogued and chosen, ultimately, not to send. He said all of it to Ryan's face, because looking away felt like one more form of dishonesty he could no longer afford. When he finished, the hallway was absolutely silent. Ryan had not moved. Not once during the 22 minutes, not a shift of weight, not a tightening of the jaw, not a single readable flicker across his face. He stood with the paper cup still in his hand and his eyes on Jihoon, and his stillness had transformed into something different now, something with density and temperature, the kind of quiet that precedes decisions rather than follows them. He said, "Wait here." He walked away. At the end of the corridor he stopped and made 2 phone calls, his voice too low for Jihoon to catch a single word. 4 minutes later, Seojun and Tail came through the stairwell door from opposite directions, which meant Ryan had called them simultaneously, which meant they had both been in the building, which meant the Kong brothers operated with the coordination of men who had spent a lifetime moving as one unit when it mattered. Seojun looked at Jihoon once. His face gave nothing. Tail did not look at Jihoon at all, which was somehow worse. The 3 brothers moved to the far end of the corridor and spoke in voices too quiet and too deliberate to penetrate, and Jihoon stood alone against the wall with the paper cup going cold in his hands and his heartbeat so loud in his own ears it was almost embarrassing. He had faced the organization's threats with steadier nerves than this. But the organization had never looked at him the way Kang Seo-jun had just looked at him, with the flat, surgical assessment of a man calculating exactly how much damage had been done. The conference lasted 9 minutes. Then Ryan came back. Alone. Seo-jun and Tail remained at the far end of the corridor, close enough to witness, far enough to give the space that this moment required. Ryan stopped in front of Jihoon. He looked at him for a long time. "You had the files," he said. "Complete access. Exactly what they sent you for." A pause. "You didn't send them. Why?" Jihoon had thought about this moment. Had rehearsed different versions of it in the dark of his apartment on nights when sleep refused to come. Had constructed reasonable, defensible answers about conscience and moral reckoning and the weight of what he had learned about the men he had been sent to destroy. Every rehearsed answer evaporated. "Because of you," Jihoon said. The silence that followed was the longest of Jihoon's life. Then something moved across Ryan's face, not warmth, not absolution, not the clean relief of forgiveness freely given. It was harder than that. More deliberate. The expression of a man choosing, with full knowledge of the cost, to extend something he had not extended in a very long time. "Then we have work to do," Ryan said. He picked up Jihoon's cold coffee cup, walked to the end of the corridor, said 4 words to his brothers that Jihoon could not hear, and came back. And this time, he stood close. Shoulder to shoulder. Facing the same direction. Forgiveness from Kang Ryan did not arrive like sunlight. It arrived like a door opening in a building Jihoon had been locked outside of his entire life. Not warm yet. Not safe yet. But open. Irrevocably, permanently open. And that terrified Jihoon more than anything the organization had ever threatened him with. The transfer notice arrived at the Incheon Welfare Facility at 9:14 on a Friday morning, and Seo-jun's security network flagged it 11 minutes later. Jihoon was in the middle of a document review when Seo-jun's chief of security, a broad-shouldered man named Won-sok who spoke in short sentences and wasted nothing, appeared at his desk and said simply, "Your cousin. We need to move." Everything after that happened fast. Within 2 hours, Jihoon's cousin, a 16-year-old boy named Daehoon, slight and serious and the only blood Jihoon had left in the world, had been quietly relocated from the facility in Incheon to a secured private residence that Seo-jun had arranged with the kind of efficiency that comes from having planned for contingencies before they become emergencies. Daehoon arrived confused, carrying a single backpack, and looked at Jihoon across the entryway of a house more expensive than anywhere either of them had ever stood and said, "Kyung, what is happening?" And Jihoon had no clean answer, so he just pulled the boy into his arms and held on. That same evening, Jihoon was moved to the Kang family compound in Hanamdong. The compound was not what the word suggested, not a fortress, not a display of intimidation, but a private estate behind high walls where natural stone and dark timber and floor-to-ceiling glass created spaces that felt, against all expectation, like rooms where people actually lived. Tail was already there when Jihoon arrived. He assessed Jihoon in the entryway with sharp, fair eyes and said nothing, which Jihoon had learned by now was Tail's version of provisional acceptance. Seo-jun showed him his room, clean lines, a window that faced the compound's inner courtyard, and explained the security protocols with the precise calm of someone who found order genuinely comforting. Ryan said nothing about the sleeping arrangements. He simply appeared at doorways. In hallways. At the far end of the dining table during the first uncomfortable dinner where no one said much but everyone said everything with the way they held their chopsticks and looked at their food. His presence near Jihoon was not the result of instruction or rotation or tactical positioning. Won-sok was positioned. Ryan was simply there. Choosing to be there. Consistently, quietly, without announcement. On the second night, the compound's encrypted communications system received a message routed through 7 servers. Won-sok brought it to Ryan and Seo-jun without letting Jihoon see it first, but Ryan brought it to Jihoon afterward and laid the printed text on the table in front of him without a word. You had one job. The files were never received. This is your final opportunity. Deliver what you owe, or everyone you have chosen over us will understand what that choice costs. 3 lines. No signature. The timestamp read 12:07 a.m. Jihoon read it. Read it again. Set it down. He had expected the threat. Had known, in the honest part of himself, that the organization would not accept silence without response. What he had not expected, what landed in his chest with the cold weight of a completely new fear, was the word. Everyone. Not just the cousin. Not just the files. Everyone. Jihoon looked up from the paper. Across the room, Ryan was watching him with that still, dark gaze, and for the first time since the server room, since the corridor, since the 22 minutes of confession that had cracked Jihoon's carefully built world right down the middle, Jihoon felt genuine, physical terror. Not for himself. They did not just know about Daehoon anymore. They knew about Ryan. The attack came at 3 in the morning, from 2 directions at once. Jihoon woke to Wonsok's voice in the corridor, low, clipped, the specific cadence of a man delivering information rather than reacting to it, and by the time he was on his feet Ryan was already in the doorway of his room, dressed, alert, every trace of sleep gone from his face as though it had never been there. The welfare facility first, Ryan said. Seo-jun is already moving. Daehoon is being pulled now. And here? Jihoon asked. Handled. That single word carried a weight that Jihoon felt in his sternum. He did not ask what handled meant. He had heard Ryan's voice in enough registers by now to know the difference between the composed professional tone and this one, quieter, flatter, stripped of everything except intent. What followed was 40 minutes that Jihoon experienced mostly through sound and distance. The compound's interior stayed sealed. Wonsok moved through hallways with 2 members of the security team. Tail appeared in the main corridor in a dark jacket, said 4 words to Wonsok, and disappeared toward the east wing with the unhurried speed of a man who had trained for exactly this. Jihoon sat in the compound's central room with his hands between his knees and the lights low and the city of Seoul glittering indifferently through the glass beyond the courtyard, and he listened. Twice he heard sounds from outside the compound walls, brief, controlled, the kind that ended quickly. Then silence. His phone buzzed. Seo-jun's name. He answered. Daehoon is safe, Seo-jun said. He is scared. He is asking for you. He is not hurt. Jihoon pressed his hand over his mouth and breathed through it for 3 seconds. Thank you, he said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. Thank Ryan, Seo-jun said. This was his call from the beginning. The line closed. Jihoon lowered the phone. The compound door opened 20 minutes later. Ryan walked in from the courtyard. His jacket was gone. His shirt was torn at the left shoulder and a cut ran along his jaw, not deep, but open, tracking a thin line of red down the sharp angle of his face. He moved without favoring anything, which told Jihoon that whatever had happened outside, Ryan had walked away from it with more composure than the evidence suggested he should have. He stopped in the doorway. The same doorway. The same stillness. The same unreadable quality, except that Jihoon could read him now, had spent enough weeks learning the specific vocabulary of this man's silences to understand that the particular quality of this one meant, "It is done, and I am still here, and I am looking at you first." Jihoon crossed the room. He did not think about it. His body moved before his mind had finished forming the decision, and his hands found Ryan's jaw, careful, shaking slightly, tilting the cut toward the light. He cleaned it with the first aid kit Wonsok had left on the side table. He worked in silence, and Ryan held completely still and let him, which from a man like Kang Ryan was its own kind of language, the language of trust made physical, of allowing care from someone whose hands you want on you for reasons that have nothing to do with wounds. When it was done, Jihoon did not step back. "I told you I would keep you safe," Ryan said. "You kept everyone safe," Jihoon said. "I kept you safe." A pause, deliberate and weighted. "There is a difference." The space between them was close enough that Jihoon could feel the warmth coming off Ryan's skin. Either of them moved. The compound was quiet around them. Somewhere in the city, Jihoon was safe. Somewhere in the East Wing, Tail was probably drinking cold coffee and pretending not to care about any of this. Somewhere Seo-jun was already thinking 3 moves ahead. And here, in this room, in this moment, 2 men stood in the wreckage of a war that was nearly over and looked at each other with the accumulated weight of every choice that had brought them to this exact point. Ryan did not say the words. He did not need to. Some things do not live in words. They live in the way a man lets you tend a wound he would never let anyone else touch, in the way his eyes find yours first in a dark room, in the way the silence between 2 people stops feeling like distance and starts feeling like home. 6 months past, the Kong Group's Legal Affairs Division had a new senior analyst whose real name was Park Jihoon, whose credentials were entirely genuine, and who arrived every morning at 7:50 with a worn paperback in his bag and a coffee order that the building's cafe staff had memorized within his first week. The organization was gone. It had not gone quietly or cleanly, nothing involving 3 coordinated intelligence operations, 1 cooperative government prosecutor, and the full weight of Kong Seojin's documented patience ever did. But it was gone. The leadership arrested. The leverage files seized and destroyed. The network of encrypted channels that had controlled Jihoon's life since that maple coffee shop at 2 in the morning, dark and cold and permanently offline. Jihoon was enrolled in a high school in Yongsan. He had his own room in a small apartment that Jihoon paid for with his first 3 paychecks and furnished with second-hand pieces. He had carried up 4 flights of stairs on a Saturday morning while Jihoon stood in the doorway making unhelpful comments about his young's taste in bookshelves. Jihoon had started smiling again, the real kind, not the careful kind that children in welfare facilities learn to produce on demand for adults who need reassurance. He had friends. He had a school club. He had texted Jihoon 11 times last Tuesday for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. That alone was worth everything. On a Thursday morning in late spring, Seo-jun called Jihoon into his office and slid a formal employment contract across the desk. Properly drawn, properly compensated, with Jihoon's real name printed at the top in clean black type. He said, "You understand legal language better than half my senior staff. Stop pretending you came here to be junior anything." Then he picked up his phone and resumed the call, which was the Kong Seo-jun version of a warm welcome, and Jihoon had learned to receive it as such. Tail passed him in the corridor afterward and said, without breaking stride or altering his expression by a single degree, "You are the only person who has ever made Ryan leave work before 9 p.m. on a weekday. It is annoying and we are grateful." He disappeared around the corner before Jihoon could respond. That afternoon, Jihoon took the elevator to the rooftop garden. He had found it in his 3rd week, a narrow terrace above the 14th floor where someone had planted boxwood and Korean pine in low stone containers, and where on a clear day the Han River was visible between the towers, silver and unhurried, moving through the city the way it had moved through every version of this city for longer than any building standing in it. He came up here when he needed to think, or, more recently, when he needed to stop thinking and simply be somewhere that felt like it belonged to him. He heard the elevator open behind him. He did not turn around. Ryan came to stand beside him, not close enough to touch, close enough to be chosen, and looked out at the river the way he looked at most things, fully, quietly, with the particular attention of a man who had learned that rushing through moments was a form of waste he could not afford. They stood like that for a while. The city moved below them. Spring light made the Han look almost warm. "Best decision I ever made," Ryan said. Jihoon looked at him. "Which one?" Ryan turned. And his face, in the afternoon light, was completely open, no composure deployed as armor, no stillness used as distance, just the man himself, looking at Jihoon the way he had looked at him in a corridor 6 months ago, when neither of them had been willing yet to name what it was. "Letting you stay," Ryan said. Jihoon looked back at the river. His chest expanded until it hurt. The good kind, the kind that means something real has taken up residence inside you and has no intention of leaving. He thought about a server room and 11 minutes and a decision made in cold blue light that had cost him everything he thought he needed and given him everything he had never known to want. He thought about a borrowed umbrella on a subway, 4 words on a terminal screen, a book with a broken spine, a corridor, a confession, a cut along a jaw that he had tended with shaking hands in a dark room while the city slept. He thought about his cousin texting 11 times on a Tuesday for no reason at all. He breathed in the spring air over Seoul and stood beside the man who had looked at him, really looked, and chosen to let the looking mean something. Yeah, Jihoon said quietly. Me too. To everyone who stayed until the very end of this story, thank you. Truly. You've felt every single moment of this alongside Jihoon and Ryan, and this story only exists because you were here for it. If this one moved you, if it stayed with you, please subscribe and turn on your notifications right now so you never miss a new story on this channel. Every week we bring you a new world, a new love, a new reason to feel something real. Drop a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you, what moment hit hardest, which chapter made you hold your breath. Your words genuinely matter to us, and we read every single one. And if you know someone who needs a beautiful story right now, someone who needs to be reminded that broken people can be chosen, that loyalty can be rebuilt, that love can arrive in the most impossible places, share this with them today. Because that is what these stories are for. We will see you in the next one.